Hello there, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. And in the next half an hour, we'll see what's making the headlines with political correspondent at the Financial Times, Jasmine Cameron-Chileshe, and former Conservative Special Advisor Anita Boateng. There they are, standing by. But first, let's see what's on some of those front pages. The gloves are off. That's how the Metro describes the latest exchanges between former presenters Philip Schofield and Eamonn Holmes over the behind-the-scenes culture at top ITV show this morning. Boris Johnson's WhatsApp account and what it might reveal to the COVID-19 inquiry is top story for The Times, which says a legal wrangle is looming over getting the messages released. The Mail leads with what it calls fury at Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer over a £1.5 million donation to the party from a top funder of the Just Stop Oil movement and demands it should be returned. The Mirror speaks to the mother of a 10-year-old boy killed by a dangerous dog who is backing the paper's campaign for government action to stop more such cases. The Eye reveals that people could be asked to recycle less waste to cut down on the number of non-recyclable items finding their way into the recycling system and having to be rejected. The Express says that high street banks are under increasing pressure to offer better rates to savers after a Which report found rates at the moment are often meagre and unjustifiable. The Financial Times leads with news that Labour is planning to force major landowners to sell off plots cheaply if it gets into power in an effort to cut the cost of building new homes. And that is also the top story on the front of tomorrow's Guardian. While The Star tells us that experts think we've been drinking our beer the wrong way and that it needs to have more of a head on it because it's better for your bell. There you go. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during this programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's papers while you watch us. Let's speak now to the political correspondent at the Financial Times, Jasmine Cameron-Chileshe, and former Conservative Special Advisor Anita Boateng, who are here with us to review the papers this evening. Great to have you both with us. Thanks so much. Anita, I'll kick off with you first, if I may, because we're going to be talking about the front page of the Metro, their headline leading on this ongoing storm at ITV. Their headline, "The gloves are off." What's this article saying?
Yeah, so this updates the world on the latest furore between presenters and former presenters now of ITV. So this is Philip Schofield opting on his Instagram page to effectively dismiss the claims of toxicity behind the scenes at ITV's This Morning, to which the former presenter Eamonn Holmes, who left the programme in 2021, according to the paper, has then responded on Twitter saying, "You don't want to pick a fight with me, Pip." It's all quite public now, the row between the former presenters and obviously the bad feeling ever since Philip Schofield was sacked as a result of what has been reported to be conduct with or carrying on with an employee who was there at quite a young age. So it's definitely something that has kept ITV's This Morning in the front pages over the past few days, and this is a sign that it perhaps might not be abating anytime soon.
Yes, certainly. The storm rumbles on and the future of the show in doubt, very much so. Now, Jasmine, to you next. Let's talk about the front page of The Guardian, because just so the viewers are aware, you've asked not to comment tonight on This Morning, given that you are moving to ITV later this summer. So let's talk about the front page of The Guardian. Labour to let councils buy land cheaply to tackle the housing crisis. This story on two of the front pages today.
Yeah, so it's a really interesting story, and it looks at the fact that Labour officials are discussing plans to give local authorities powers to buy up land cheaply and then develop it. And of course, we know that housing is set to be one of the key issues going into the next general election, be that what's happening in the rental market or what's happening with mortgages or trying to get more first-time buyers on the ladder. So it's a very interesting set of proposals that the party are discussing. And of course, Labour officials know that actually, if they put forward a strong electoral offer, particularly to those aged between 21 and 40, those individuals who typically would be getting on the housing ladder, would be starting families, and would traditionally be voting, becoming more conservative with age, but statistics show that that's not happening. And so Labour officials feel like if they can tap into that core voter base, actually they've got a strong offer to put to the public. And it will be quite interesting to see how CCHQ, how the Levelling Up Department engage with these brief proposals, and perhaps they'll try to offer some sort of counter or alternative going closest to the election.
Yeah, and Anita, is there anything you'd like to add to this? Keir Starmer is under fire for his promise to make it easier to build on the green belt as well.
Yeah, and he's got this sort of broader ambition to have 70% of people in the UK to be homeowners, and it's very clear that Labour doesn't really have a clear idea about how they're going to achieve this. So it's interesting that we've got this announcement now about compulsory purchase orders, and I won't bore your viewers by trying to explain exactly how this works, but effectively local councils can acquire land in quite limited circumstances, and there's an indication here from this story that they're going to allow local councils to go much further than that. But I don't see here a clear indication of how this would make a demonstrable difference to the broader housing ecosystem, in particular around house building, because often councils acquire property basically for development purposes and not for necessarily straight for building houses. So again, I think it's a lot of ideas, Labour sort of slightly throwing things at the wall and seeing what things would make a difference, because actually increasing house building substantially is quite a significant challenge. And I think it's interesting that Labour thinks this is winning ground. And it's certainly clear that the public want to see more house building, but achieving that, it's actually quite complicated. It's not clear that there is a comprehensive plan for delivering that.
OK, and just on political and policy ideas, Jasmine, this story inside tomorrow's Metro about Rishi Sunak's plans to perhaps put a price cap on the cost of essential goods to help with the cost of living crisis. It certainly sounds, according to this article, that there are some industry figures who doubt whether it will work.
Yeah, so these ideas were briefed to the weekend papers. I think they first emerged in the Sunday Telegraph. This idea that ministers were discussing perhaps a voluntary cap on essential items. Now, we all know, anyone that's gone to a supermarket, we've seen the price of basic goods like milk, eggs, bread, cheese, dairy, all of this has gone up, and it really is impacting particularly lower income families. And so the government has briefed out these proposals, but there really has been a bit of a backlash on all sides. So you've had Conservative MPs and ministers who were very instinctively against what they feel is excessive state intervention, basically arguing that this isn't really a Conservative proposal. And then you have leading business figures arguing that actually this isn't really going to make much of a difference, and it just feels a little bit like posturing. So it seems as though the government is scrambling to look as though it's got some effective proposals to bring down inflation. Now, if we remember, bringing down inflation is one of Sunak's 5 pledges to the public, that he wants to halve inflation by the end of the year. So obviously there's a little bit of a mad scramble at the top of government as to how they go around doing that, how they create a perception that actually the government is on top of this issue and is doing all it can and exhausting all channels to really look as though it's on the side of the voters, on the side of consumers, to get some of those prices down.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, this idea, Anita? What do you make of this mad scramble at the top of the government, as Jasmine put it there? What do you think's going on as a former Conservative advisor?
I wouldn't quite call it a mad scramble, but I do think that the figures out earlier in the week about inflation, and particularly about the levels of core inflation that we're now seeing in our economy, is deeply worrying. And I think a sincere concern in Number 10 and likewise in HMT about the level of inflation that now seems to be slightly bedding its way in, and what that means for people, because inflation does, sort of destroy the economy for a lot of people in terms of how how much poorer it can make people. And the government doesn't have a huge number of levers that it can use to support that. And we know that the supermarkets are very much, wanting to do their best for consumers. So I think it makes sense to me that the government would want to talk to those retailers and say, look, what more can we do to make sure that across core areas, and particularly when it's purchasing items that people who are poorer will see and feel that inflationary hit much higher, what can we do to keep those prices down at a point where food inflation is at a 30-year high? So I think it makes sense for the government to be having those conversations. It doesn't look like the government is looking at regulating, and it's much more about a voluntary agreement. But if it does come up in some fashion, I think that would really help some of the poorest people who are really struggling with food prices.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Let's just talk about the front page of tomorrow's Mail, Jasmine, before we go to a short break. Fury at Starmer's £1.5 million from Just Stop Oil donor, their headline tomorrow morning, saying that Keir Starmer is under fire over donations to Labour from a key funder to Just Stop Oil.
Yeah, and I do think we will probably see more and more of these stories heading into the general election, as there's a lot more scrutiny over where parties are getting their money from, who's donating what, the stories behind these figures. And of course, Just Stop Oil is the environmental group that has been embroiled in some level of controversy over the past few months over some of the tactics that it's used to get its messaging across. And so in that light, particularly, and there are individuals who are arguing that Starmer shouldn't have accepted the money or now should return the money as some sort of gesture. I'd be sceptical as to whether that would actually take place. But I think, as I say, there'll be more and more of these stories and more of a bit of a rifling through, the party's expenses and figuring out who's funding some of these political parties and how much we can read into that.
Yeah, Anita, your thoughts on this story? Certainly Just Stop Oil has divided opinion in the way they've carried out some of their protests.
Absolutely. And I think the thing that's more concerning really is we've seen the announcement recently from Keir Starmer about stopping North Sea oil drilling. And that's obviously about whether the UK can remain energy secure. So there's clear indication here, I think, that Just Stop Oil, whether it's via this connection from the donor or whatever, is impacting the Labour Party policy. And that's where I think there are some genuine concerns, because the UK isn't yet at a stage where it can only use renewable energy, for instance, and therefore you're in a situation where either the UK is producing its own oil and gas, or the UK is buying it on the global market. And we've seen what's happened to global oil and gas prices recently. So I think there is a broad and more serious concern about energy security in the future if Keir Starmer's policy comes to fruition. But I think an interesting, Jasmine said, sorry, I don't know why I had a brain fade on your name there. I think that as we get closer to the election, there'll be more scrutiny about the motivations behind some of these big policies that will be coming from both political parties.